watching it all, Dr Thina Nzo, an expert on local government. Dr Nzo, good afternoon to you. So these parties now all in the same room for 2 full days. That's a lot of leaders, a lot of, dare I say it, Dr Nzo, maybe an ego or two. So far, no major public fights that we can see. Is that progress all on its own?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Good afternoon to your viewers. Yes, this is a very interesting, unfolding event, but I found it so interesting that it happens coincidentally after the different parties had been invited to participate in the national dialogue that was initiated by the presidency in partnership with UWC, where all parties were called together to come under one roof and discuss matters relating to the way in which we're handling coalitions. But now we find that the minority have taken another approach of actually gathering themselves under one roof to talk about this issue. And we know that they were quite bereaved. Some of them were bereaved by some of the decisions or the propositions for the decisions of the reforms that were made, particularly decisions relating to the disproportionality when it comes to the distribution of coalition government formation that we are seeing happening at a local government level. So here, what we're seeing again is that it's the same kind of conversation that seems to be the crux of the issue that brings them together on how can they, try to wax and wane around the issue of disproportionality and threshold. And what we're getting out here from this, dialogue is that they still do consider the fact that, a party that still has the highest level of numbers in terms of the electoral support may lead, the coalition formation. And yeah, it's quite an interesting agreement, taking into account that some of the parties were bereaved about this. But again, I'm not so surprised because the DA seems to be the leader of this dialogue that we're seeing happening here.
Are you suggesting that lots of different people are saying different things in different forums, even though sometimes, Dr. Nzo, it's the same people? I mean, the DA, along with the ANC, both want a sort of 5% or a 1% threshold. You don't get to be in Parliament unless you actually have 1%. Some of the smaller parties that would suffer from this are currently in negotiations with the DA right now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's quite interesting. That's why I'm even using the term waxing and waning in between, these different, discussions, because we don't really have much clarity in terms of what is it that they really, truly want to get out of this? And I also find it quite very surprising, Stephen, because some of these, discussions that are happening behind closed doors, they are discussions that are taking place without the participation of the electorate, without really conducting polls, just to find out, what do citizens really want? I mean, some of the countries even go for referendums, for example, if they are stuck in a system that they do not understand how they can go about it in terms of resolving it. So here, as much as they do echo, the understanding that they are continuously engaging, with civil society, but who is part of that civil society? Who has the loudest voice in civil society? What about citizens who are not part of the formal formation of civil society? So for me, I find it that, that aspect very problematic, because here we're dealing with issues that have to do with the electorate who also want to have a voice in some of these discussions when it comes to the formation of government.
But won't the electorate be consulted? I mean, the ANC's been working with different parties. I don't recall it, just to argue the other way, if I may, Dr. Nzo. They didn't ask their voters if they wanted them to work with the EFF and local government or not. I mean, I hear you. I think you make an important point. But isn't it true that people will be consulted in the election?
Well, I always say that the election is very minimalistic. It's a minimalistic form of representative democracy because it doesn't allow us to have forms of deliberate democracies in the way in which we want our executive, our cabinet, our government to be formed, the people whom we should be electing to lead our municipalities, lead our provincial government, nor our national government. So for me, I still think that as much as we may say that, yes, citizens do cast, the ballot vote, But currently, right now, we're faced with a democratic deficit, and it primarily comes from the fact that we have politicians, again, who sit behind closed doors and take that opportunity of actually deciding on our behalf. Sometimes those decisions don't reflect what we want as citizens. So I think this debate should be open to a broader spectrum of society so that they can get a clearer, understanding, or should I say, get the nuances that are coming from the ground in terms of what it is that the electorate truly, really want from government.
The first governing principle that these parties have agreed to, and they published these last night, is a commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law. What does that tell us? I mean, is that maybe a little bit of a jibe at the ANC and the EFF? Perhaps, I don't know. Maybe I'm too old and cynical. But I mean, the fact that this is their first governing principle, does that tell us anything?
Well, I think it emanates, from the contemporary history where we're coming from, where the ANC as the governing party, particularly at national and majority of these provinces, where we have had to deal with issues related with state capture, the undermining of the law, the undermining of the constitution, all the necessary components that hold together the governance of a state. So I think they are using it, as a political, jab to say that our constitution is compromised, our legal system is compromised, and our governance is facing a threat, which ultimately tells us that the state is facing a threat of non-governmentality when we look at those issues. So yes, they are using it, as a political scorecard. But I think in all essence, truly speaking, there is a fundamental issue or a problem when it comes to institutional government in this country. And yes, it resonates with our concerns, as the public.
One of the issues around the coalitions we've seen up until now is around positions and who gets appointed to what. Sometimes that's just simple patronage. This group of parties say that they will do this on merit. I don't know, Dr. Nzo, I can see huge arguments about merit. I mean, what happens if one party gets no positions at all? I mean, would they stay in the coalition? I can't see it.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, do they refer to merit when it comes to individuals whom they would like to appoint, in the executive or the cabinet, who have shown a history of, experience, performance in their previous political roles? I'm not sure about that, because what we have seen, Stephen, from a local government perspective, is that there are certain candidates who emerge, as mayors, for example, who do not have any form of experience or political leadership, but because there is always this horse trading that's going on behind closed doors, and there's a whole lot of compromises that are made there. So I'm really not sure if whether really that would necessarily work, particularly if you're going to be looking at newly emerging parties that are going to get seats. I mean, there are many parties that have already launched in the past 2 months who really want to run the race of actually participating in the national and provincial government elections. And we are even looking at the possibility of even getting independent candidates. So that really causes, a certain level of uncertainty when we look at what will constitute merit within the political management and political governance framework of political parties.
Dr. Thina Nzo, as always, thank you for the time. Expert on local government.